Welcome to this presentation on the Regis Thesis. We're here with me, Mr. Kiczek, Mr. Kennedy, and Ms. Miller-Lewis to try to work with you on developing the Regis Thesis, which essentially will be the foundation of your essay. And our collaboration here sort of demonstrates how the thesis statement is something that will be applied in all your different classes, whether it be English, theology, art history, and even some of the sciences. And even though this is a video and you're not sitting in class right now, we're going to ask that at this point you make sure you have a notebook out and a pen ready and that you're taking some notes about this presentation. Your teacher may check these notes tomorrow or there might be a quiz, so just make sure that you're ready. The thesis statement is the foundation of your essay, meaning it's the building block. It's the essential part of your essay that will then be expanded in the body paragraph. A thesis statement is something that, as it says here, poses an argument instead of states facts. And the difference there is that a thesis statement is something that can be challenged. It's something that someone else might disagree and believe something else, rather than being a statement of facts, such as this story is told in the first person, or Barack Obama won the presidency in 2008. It's going to assert a claim about something instead of professing a belief. So it's not going to be something like, I think that Edgar Allan Poe is the greatest short story writer ever. But instead it's going to assert a claim about something that, again, can be challengeable. And the thesis statement is something that, while you might first talk about in English class, will be applicable in just about every single class you come across here at Regis and even into college. The thesis statement is going to be used in your English class to write about a short story, in your theology class to explicate a Bible passage, in your art history class to interpret a painting, in your history class to explain the significance of a historical event, and even in your science, mathematics, and technology classes to pose a hypothesis and then support it with some reasoning. A thesis statement can also even be used in some of your extracurriculars. If you're penning an opinion article for The Crow, or even on the Hearn as you're arguing a contention on a topic for LD or public forum, you're using the thesis statement as the building block of your argument. Now, while the thesis statement might begin as a whole bunch of notes or maybe even as a paragraph, when you're ready to say that this is your first draft, the thesis statement ought to be one sentence. And it ought to be one sentence that's in direct response to the prompt or question that you've been assigned. But we'll talk more about that later. And while we're just looking for one sentence here, eventually the thesis statement, of course, is going to be a part of your essay. And it will typically be found at the end of the introductory paragraph.
So Mr. Kiczek has just explained to you guys the importance of a thesis statement, and he has even said that it is the foundation of your essay. So clearly this is a very, very important sentence that you want to make sure is truly excellent and clear. The good news is that there is an accepted structure for a thesis statement that many teachers will expect of you, and that structure has two parts, an assertion and a justification. So you can see here that a good thesis statement asserts a position and justifies that position with evidence and reasoning. Just like a lawyer asserts his position in a given trial, he asserts that the defendant is guilty and then justifies it using evidence and interpretation of that evidence. You will do the same thing in your essays, and your thesis statement is the first statement of that position and a preview of the reasons. So the first aspect of a good thesis statement that we will explain is the assertion. To assert means to state a claim or argument confidently or forcefully. Look down at that bottom bullet point. Confidently and forcefully means you are stating this as if it were true. A thesis statement should be challengeable, as Mr. Kiczek said. Other people might think it's not true, but your role as a writer is to assert that it is true and then to prove why that is the case. So to be confident and forceful, don't use the first person, I believe or I think. State your assertion as if it is true. And you'll notice from the middle bullet point that, of course, a good thesis will respond directly to the essay prompt. You want it not only to be a good assertion, but one that's on topic. You guys know that people assert things all the time. I might assert that I can dunk a basketball, or in Law and Order, we saw Sam Waterson asserting that the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. There are all kinds of assertions, and we hear them all the time, and they're statements of a position or statements of a claim. In this case, we're going to be imagining an essay that's responding to a question about the reliability of the narrator in The Cask of Amontillado. So at the bottom, you see a pretty good assertion about Montresor's reliability. Montresor is an unreliable narrator. That is a clear, definitive statement that he is an unreliable rather than a reliable narrator. The author takes a clear position and states it forcefully. So that's a good assertion.
So it's Mr. Kiczek back here now, and I want to talk to you about a justification. The justification is the defense of that assertion that you're making. To justify, as you see there, means to show or to prove to be right or reasonable. And your justification will sometimes even sort of telegraph or preview the main ideas that you'll later discuss in your body paragraphs. In order to justify, for example, an assertion that I can dunk, I would have to actually dunk a basketball, and I'll be making a YouTube video of that later. A justification in the courtroom, for example, is essential, right? If that attorney gets up there and says, well, the defendant is guilty, he would need some evidence to prove that true. He would need to be showing the jury fingerprints or DNA evidence in order to justify that assertion he's making. And similarly, with a character like Montresor, we would need to tell the reader of this essay why he's unreliable, what qualities of Montresor make him an unreliable narrator. And just like if you were making a claim about the Oakland Athletics, you'd need to be able to show some numbers, some data to prove that sabermetrics led to their success. So now that we've established the two parts of a thesis statement, let's see how we can put it all together. You're looking in this slide at two examples of a thesis statement, both containing an assertion and justification. And what we'd like you to do at this moment is try to find for yourself where is the assertion and where is the justification. So pause the video at this moment and read these two sentences carefully and see if you can identify the two parts of the thesis statement. Okay, so I'm assuming you've taken a stab at it, and let's look at these together now. Let's start with the first sentence there. If you said that Telemachus matures throughout the Odyssey, is the assertion, you'd be correct. That's where the writer is making a claim about Telemachus as a character. And if you identified this part of the sentence as the justification, you would be correct as well. There, we're showing how we're going to prove that true. We're showing how these qualities are the examples of Telemachus's maturation. In the sentence below, we've reversed the order. If you identified the first part of that sentence as the assertion, you were correct. And of course, our justification follows. And what this illustrates is that there's no particular formula here, that at times the assertion might be in the beginning of the sentence, and other times the justification might be at the beginning of the sentence. It's about here establishing your voice, trying it out, and testing what works best for you.
Okay, hi, Ms. Miller-Lewis here, to take us to the next step. Now, you might have noticed in those two thesis statements that we were just looking at in the previous slide, that there are two parts of that sentence, and they are linked by a really important interpretive verb. That is the word that links the assertion to those pieces of evidence that you are accumulating now to start to set up the proof of your claim. Let's take a look at the two sentences down below, and you'll notice that teachers, too, need to make typographical corrections at times. We are missing a word in there. But Telemachus's growing confidence, newfound courage, and increased cunning demonstrate that he matures throughout the Odyssey. You had previously noticed that that first half of the sentence is that evidence, that justification, and that the assertion came in the latter half of the sentence. And that word in the middle, demonstrate, is what we mean by an interpretive verb that sets you up, your reader up, to understand the relationship between that assertion and the evidence used to support it. Take a look at the next one. Again, pause just briefly. You identify what that interpretive verb is. If you notice that the word illustrated is the word that links that, in this case now, the claim followed by the justifications, yeah, that's it. There's a whole series of words, actually, that can be very helpful. Look at, study, make use of. We've supplied a bunch of them here. Words such as show, demonstrate, represent, portray, imply. These verbs will all help you make that strong connection between the claim you want to make and the evidence you want to use in order to support it in your thesis statement.
So this is Mr. Kennedy back with you guys. Ms. Miller-Lewis just went over some really good verbs for linking an assertion and justification. Now I want to take a look at some example thesis statements to point out strengths and weaknesses of a few that are not perfect, some really that are inadequate. So let's start with the first one. I believe Montresor is clearly an unreliable narrator. You might yourself think, what is good about this thesis? What is wrong about it? So you might take a minute now to pause and think that through. As you will see, this thesis has at least one key mistake, and that is the I believe that leads off this sentence. As you know from the slide about assertions, you should be asserting your claim strongly, confidently, forcefully, and you should not use the first person. I believe weakens the statement, so that should be taken out completely. One good thing that this writer does have is a clear assertion. Montresor is an unreliable narrator. That's not bad as an assertion, but this author is lacking a justification. So that's a big problem. There are no reasons. There's no justification coming along with this thesis statement, and that's a really big weakness. Okay, so Montresor is an unreliable narrator, and we're left asking why, or what proved this. So this thesis is really not so great, except for the fact that it has an assertion. The second thesis says Poe's characterization of Montresor shows that he is an unreliable narrator. Again, you might pause and try to critique this thesis as you might in a peer editing workshop. Questions you might ask are, can you find an assertion? Can you find a justification? Is there an interpretive verb linking the two? So pause and do that now. Depending on what you thought, a couple of things I'll point out. There is a good linking verb, shows, that's very solid, good interpretive verb to link the two. And again, there is a clear assertion, he is an unreliable narrator. That's a strong stance on the question. You'll also notice that there is a justification. Poe's characterization of Montresor is part of the backup or the support for the idea that he's an unreliable narrator, but it's much too broad and vague. This is a very common problem that myself and other teachers have noted on student theses, that they give a good preview of the reasons, but that preview is just so broad, it doesn't really give us any guidance or any specific preview of what you're going to talk about in your essay. So I would encourage all of you to be as specific and detailed as possible in drafting your theses. Okay, last one. In some ways, Montresor is an unreliable narrator, but in other ways he is not. So pause for a second and critique this guy. Okay, once you've done that, I'm comfortable to just strike this one completely because this thesis has really neither an assertion or a justification. It's very vague, and it flip-flops between two different opinions. At first, the author asserts Montresor is unreliable, but then he asserts in other ways he is not. This thesis doesn't really tell us much about how to read the story Cask of Amontillado. It doesn't take a strong stance. It doesn't give any reasons one way or another. So this last thesis is really inadequate, and you might be thinking, well, of course, Mr. Kennedy, Montresor is unreliable in some ways, but in other ways he is not. That might be an acceptable comment or observation about the story, but in an essay, your goal is to convince me that he either is or is not reliable. So you always want to take a strong stance that directly responds to the prompt and stick by that stance. There should be, as Mr. Kiczek said, your thesis should be challengeable. So there should be things that go against your own claim. Just like in court, there's guilty and not guilty, or the prosecution and the defense, but you should be on one side of those two, not trying to assess both or all of the options on either side. So try to avoid some of these pitfalls in writing your own thesis statements.
Okay, so Ms. Miller-Lewis back again. And now that you've had a chance to explore not only what a strong thesis statement consists of, that assertion and justification, but gotten some really good advice about the kinds of words to use and some pitfalls to watch out for, how to correct your own work. You might be wondering, well, how do I actually do that? What are the steps for writing a strong thesis statement? And that's what this next section is about. Okay, so there are, in fact, a number of steps that you can take in order to construct, to build that strong thesis statement. And that's what I'm going to point out now. And what I would recommend is that before you go anywhere, you take a second look at that essay prompt, the question itself, and review it. However elementary it may seem to you, it's going to help you out. It's going to do you good. What do I mean by this? What was your question? Let's look at the question you've been working on with this video. Is Edgar Allan Poe's Montresor a reliable narrator? It is a good question to stop and ask yourself, well, what is a narrator? What does he or she do? What are our expectations of a narrator? And what does it mean, the key word here, to be reliable? What are your expectations of reliable behavior? Somebody you can count on, someone you can trust. And who's Montresor? That may seem too obvious. But if you begin to, in this case, kind of consider what you know about him thus far, and start to jot some notes on all three of these elements of the question, you will have already begun to do the work you need to do to frame that strong thesis. So then, having begun to jot some notes, what we'd recommend you do is start to review the rest of your reading and discussion notes looking out for those relevant points that you've already collected. And don't stop there. Take more notes. Start from the spot in some reading that relates to what this question of reliability. What are these moments where you see Montresor behaving, speaking to his audience, and explore what else you know about him, looking for those really concrete details that will help you construct that thesis statement. In other words, those pieces of evidence that are precise and descriptive, they are going to make for the building of a strong foundation and that kind of specific thesis statement that you are looking to offer your reader. So having taken those first few steps, here's a really crucial moment to remember that as much as we want to proceed in this really straight line, this quick climb up the steps from gathering our notes to formulating that thesis, and you want things to proceed in a really good, logical way, the writing process doesn't always go that way. That it often happens in fits and starts, in bits and pieces. So what we'd recommend that you do is don't get frustrated. Acknowledge that could happen. Don't get scared that it's never going to come together. But go ahead and draft that thesis statement, and in the process of exploring and looking for your evidence, you will have the chance, and likely perhaps even need to, revise it as you go along. Take it as a process that is going to take you through some steps and detours, and that will give you the chance to rethink, and you should take the chance to rethink what will be and come about to be that strong statement of both assertion and strong evidence to justify what your point of view is.
So that brings us to the end of our video on writing a strong Regis thesis. And as the slide tells you here, again, Rome wasn't built in a day, and your thesis statement won't be either. It'll be a process of drafting. You'll change some words around, mix some things around. But one thing to keep in mind is that as you write your essay, your thesis may change too, and that's okay. Part of writing is the process of discovering what your argument is. And so you might find that when you're ready to hit print on that final draft, your thesis statement has not only changed, but has improved as well. We hope this helps, and we hope to see some great thesis statements from you tomorrow.